It was a chilly evening, and I had just finished preparing dinner when I heard the unexpected knock at the door. I wiped my hands on my apron and rushed to answer it. As I swung open the door, Mark's face greeted me, but it was a face filled with worry and apprehension. "Mark, what's wrong?" I asked, my concern evident in my voice. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze shifting away from mine, as if he couldn't bear to look me in the eyes. Then, with a deep sigh, he finally spoke. "I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." I stepped aside to let him in, my heart pounding with a sense of foreboding. Mark had always been a bit of a dreamer, someone who believed that the next big opportunity was just around the corner. But lately, his behavior had become more erratic, his dreams more grandiose. I feared that whatever he was about to reveal was going to be another one of his reckless schemes. He paced nervously in our modest living room, the weight of his secret clearly visible on his shoulders. Finally, he turned to face me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and desperation. "I borrowed $100,000, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it was an investment opportunity, a way to secure Timmy's future." My heart sank as I processed the magnitude of what he had just confessed. We were far from wealthy, and $100,000 was a sum we could never hope to repay. But that wasn't the worst of it, Mark continued, his words like a punch to the gut. "I used Timmy as collateral," he confessed, his voice cracking with regret. "I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Our beloved son, Timmy, was only 7 years old at the time. How could Mark put our child's well-being at risk like this?" My shock quickly turned into anger, and my voice trembled with a mixture of fear and fury. "You used our son as collateral," I exclaimed, my eyes welling up with tears. "Mark, how could you? What were you thinking?" Mark's feeble attempt to explain himself only fueled my anger. He talked about a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, about how this was the only way to secure Timmy's future, but it all sounded like a desperate rationalization for an unforgivable act. As I stood there, trying to comprehend the enormity of what had just transpired, I knew that our lives had been irrevocably changed. The knock at the door had brought a secret to light that would shatter our world, and it was only the beginning of a nightmarish journey that would test the very limits of our family's strength. The air in our living room grew heavy with tension as Mark's confession hung between us like a dark cloud. I couldn't believe that he had used our innocent son, Timmy, as collateral for a loan. The shock of it all paralyzed me momentarily, but the urgency of the situation quickly snapped me out of my stupor. I demanded more details, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "How could you do this, Mark? How could you put Timmy's life at risk like that?" Mark's face contorted with guilt as he tried to explain his reasoning. He spoke of the loan sharks he had borrowed from, painting them as ruthless individuals who would stop at nothing to collect their debt. He insisted that this was the only way to secure the money needed for Timmy's future, that the investment he had made would surely pay off. I couldn't wrap my head around it. It was as if Mark had made a devil's bargain, sacrificing our son's well-being for the promise of financial gain. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I struggled to find words to convey my anger and disappointment. "Timmy is just a child, Mark," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "He should never have been involved in this. What have you done?" Mark's feeble explanations only fueled my rage. He spoke of his desperation, of the mounting debts we had accumulated over the years, and how he saw this as the only way out. But none of his excuses could justify the unimaginable risk he had taken with our son's life. As the realization of the situation settled in, I knew that I had to act swiftly and decisively. I couldn't trust Mark to handle this crisis on his own, especially considering the reckless decision he had made. The safety and well-being of Timmy became my sole focus, and I vowed to protect him from the dangerous people Mark had become entangled with. In the days that followed Mark's shocking confession, our home became a battleground of emotions. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, and a cloud of unease hung over us like a heavy shroud. I couldn't simply let Mark's reckless decision go unchallenged, and he knew that I wouldn't rest until we found a way to protect Timmy from the dangerous situation he had been thrust into. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows in our living room, I confronted Mark about his actions once more. I had spent hours researching the loan sharks he had borrowed from, learning more about their criminal network and the ruthless reputation they had earned. The danger was real, and we needed to act swiftly. "Mark," I began, my voice steady but determined, "we can't let this continue. We need to find a way to get Timmy back and extricate ourselves from this mess." Mark's face contorted with guilt and anxiety as he listened to my words. He knew he had made a grave mistake, one that had put our family in jeopardy, and he had no easy solutions to offer. As I pressed him for answers and demanded that he take responsibility for his actions, Mark's frustration boiled over. He couldn't bear the weight of his guilt, and the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted in a violent outburst. In a moment of shock and disbelief, Mark lashed out, his hand striking me with a force that I hadn't anticipated. Pain radiated from my cheek, and I stumbled backward, my eyes welling up with tears. I had never imagined that the man I had loved and trusted for so long could resort to violence. "Mark, how could you?" I cried out, both from the physical pain and the emotional turmoil that washed over me. "Is this what we've become?" For a brief, agonizing moment, I was faced with the harsh reality of the situation. My husband had not only endangered our son's life, but had now resorted to violence in the face of his guilt. I knew in that moment that I could no longer trust him to make the right decisions for our family. As I retreated to our bedroom, nursing the bruise on my cheek and trying to make sense of the turmoil in my heart, I realized that the time for action had come. I couldn't stay in this house with a man who'd endangered our child and crossed the line into violence. It was time to formulate a plan to protect Timmy from the dangerous path that Mark had set us on. The aftermath of Mark's violent outburst left me shaken, both physically and emotionally. I retreated to our dimly lit bedroom, my hand gently caressing the bruised cheek where his anger had found its mark. The pain I felt went far beyond the physical. It was the deep emotional wounds that hurt the most. As I sat on our bed, a mix of anger, fear, and determination surged through me. I knew I couldn't stay in this house with Mark, not when he had shown such a dangerous side of himself. The life we had built together seemed to crumble before my eyes, and I had to think about Timmy's safety above all else. I reached for my phone and dialed my sister Sarah's number. Sarah had always been my confidant, my source of strength in times of trouble. She was also someone who could be counted on for sound advice and unwavering support. "Sarah, I need your help," I said, my voice trembling as I recounted the shocking events of the past few days. I told her about Mark's reckless decision to use Timmy as collateral for a loan, his violent outburst, and the dangerous people we were now entangled with. Sarah listened attentively, her concern growing with each word. She was well aware of Mark's impulsive tendencies, but even she was taken aback by the gravity of the situation. "We need to get Timmy out of there," Sarah said firmly. "And we need to make sure he's safe." I nodded in agreement, my eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to do, Sarah. I'm scared, but I can't let Timmy stay in this dangerous situation." Sarah assured me that we would figure things out together, that she would help me every step of the way. We decided that the first order of business was to gather as much information as we could about the loan sharks and their criminal network. We needed to understand the extent of the danger we were in. Over the next few days, Sarah and I worked tirelessly, poring over records, making discreet inquiries, and even enlisting the help of a private investigator to dig deeper into the criminal underworld that Mark had foolishly entered. We had to be cautious, as any misstep could put Timmy's life in even greater jeopardy. With each passing day, the danger that Mark had brought into our lives became more apparent. Sarah and I continued to gather information about the loan sharks and their criminal network, trying to navigate the treacherous waters of the underworld we had unwittingly entered. As we delved deeper into our research, it became increasingly clear that these people Mark had borrowed from were not to be underestimated. They had a reputation for ruthlessness and a willingness to resort to violence to collect their debts. This only fueled our determination to keep our plans hidden from Mark, who remained oblivious to our efforts. Our private investigator, a discreet and seasoned professional, proved to be an invaluable asset. He helped us gather crucial information about the loan sharks' operations, their connections, and their methods. We learned of their secretive meetings, coded messages, and a network of contacts that extended far beyond our initial understanding. Despite the fear that gnawed at my every waking moment, the bond between Sarah and me grew stronger. She provided unwavering support, and her presence gave me the strength to carry on. Together, we vowed to protect Timmy at all costs and find a way to extricate ourselves from this nightmare. But the deeper we delved, the more complex the situation became. We realized that we couldn't simply confront the loan sharks and demand Timmy's release. Doing so would put all of us in grave danger, and the safety of my son remained paramount. As the days turned into weeks and the pressure continued to mount, I knew that our time was running out. The loan sharks were growing impatient, and Mark remained oblivious to the extent of the danger he had put us in. We needed a plan, a way to outmaneuver our ruthless adversaries while ensuring Timmy's safety. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure continued to mount. Sarah and I were in a race against time to find a way to protect Timmy from the dangerous loan sharks that Mark had become entangled with. The deeper we delved into their criminal network, the more we realized just how ruthless and unforgiving these people could be. Our private investigator had unearthed information about the loan sharks' operations, their known associates, and their patterns of behavior. We had a clearer picture of the danger we faced, but we also knew that confronting them directly could lead to disaster. These were not individuals who could be reasoned with or threatened into releasing Timmy. Sarah and I held many late-night meetings, strategizing and trying to come up with a plan that would ensure Timmy's safety without putting our lives at even greater risk. We discussed options that ranged from going to the authorities to seeking help from powerful connections, but every path we considered seemed fraught with danger. One evening, as we pored over the files and notes scattered on the kitchen table, Sarah spoke up. "We need to consider every option, even the ones that seem impossible," she said, her voice filled with determination. I nodded in agreement, recognizing the gravity of our situation. It was clear that these loan sharks had eyes and ears everywhere. If we were going to protect Timmy, we needed to be careful and strategic in our approach. But as the days turned into weeks, our situation grew increasingly dire. The loan sharks had grown impatient, and Mark remained oblivious to the extent of the danger he had put us in. The threat loomed over us like a dark cloud, and I knew that we couldn't afford to wait any longer. As the days turned into weeks, and our research into the loan sharks network continued, Sarah and I faced mounting pressure. The danger we were in became increasingly palpable, and the need to protect Timmy weighed heavily on our hearts. One evening, after yet another intense discussion about our options, I knew it was time to confront Mark. He couldn't remain ignorant of the perilous situation any longer. It was his reckless actions that had brought us here, and he needed to be part of the solution. I gathered all the evidence we had accumulated, the files, the notes, the private investigator's findings, and laid them out on the kitchen table. Sarah stood by my side, her presence a source of strength and support. When Mark returned home that evening, the tension in the room was palpable. He saw the documents laid out before him, and his face turned pale as he realized the gravity of the situation. "What's all this?" Mark asked, his voice quivering with fear. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and began to explain the extent of our research and the dangerous people he had borrowed from. I told him about their criminal network, their connections, and their reputation for ruthlessness. Mark's face twisted with fear and regret as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. "I can't believe I put Timmy in danger like this," Mark admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what I was getting us into." Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to his words. It was a side of Mark I had never seen before. A vulnerable, regretful man who had made a grave error in judgment, but the danger we were in was real, and regret alone wouldn't protect Timmy. "We have to find a way to get Timmy back and ensure our safety," I said firmly, wiping away my tears. "We can't do it alone. We need to go to the authorities and confess everything." Mark nodded in agreement, his fear and remorse evident. He understood that this was the only way out of the dangerous situation he had put us in. The decision to go to the authorities and confess our situation weighed heavily on all of us. Mark's fear and remorse were palpable, and the realization of the danger he had put our family in haunted him day and night. I could see the torment in his eyes as he grappled with the consequences of his reckless actions. In the days leading up to our decision to seek help from law enforcement, Mark had become a different person. The desperation he felt was etched onto his face, and he was determined to do whatever it took to make amends and protect our son, Timmy. One evening, as we sat in our small living room, Mark fell to his knees before me, tears streaming down his face. He begged for forgiveness in a voice that trembled with emotion. It was a side of him I had never seen before. Vulnerable, remorseful, and filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," Mark choked out between sobs. "I can't believe what I've done to our family. I'll do anything to make this right, to keep Timmy safe." I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for Mark, despite the anger and disappointment that still lingered within me. He had made a terrible mistake, one that had put us all in danger, but it was clear that he now understood the gravity of his actions. I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and nodded. "We're going to get through this together, Mark, but it won't be easy, and we'll have to face the consequences of your choices." Mark's remorse hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the dangerous path we had been forced onto. But as his tears fell, it became clear that he was willing to cooperate fully in our efforts to protect Timmy and secure our family's future. Mark's tearful apology and his newfound determination to make amends had a profound impact on our family. It was a turning point in our journey, one that brought us closer together despite the immense challenges we faced. We were united by our shared goal of protecting Timmy and finding a way out of the dangerous situation that Mark's reckless actions had created. In the days that followed, we continued to gather evidence and prepare for our confession to the authorities. Mark cooperated fully, providing every piece of information he could about the loan sharks, their criminal activities, and his dealings with them. We knew that going to the authorities was a risky move, but it was a risk we had to take to ensure Timmy's safety. As the day of our confession approached, we couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung over us. We knew that the loan sharks would not take kindly to our actions, and the consequences could be dire. But the safety of our son was paramount, and we were willing to face whatever came our way. The night before we were scheduled to meet with the authorities, Mark and I sat together in our bedroom, our hearts heavy with anticipation. We knew that our lives were about to change in ways we couldn't predict, and the uncertainty weighed on us. "I love you, Sarah," Mark said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep Timmy safe." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at the man I'd once loved, the man who had made a terrible mistake but was now willing to make amends. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope for our future. The next morning, we met with the authorities and laid out the entire truth of our situation. It was a difficult and emotional process, but we knew it was the only way to protect Timmy and ourselves from the dangerous loan sharks.